Sitting in my living room, I attempted to lose myself in the work that had piled up around me like an insurmountable mountain. The glow of my laptop screen illuminated the countless documents I needed to sift through, but the incessant thumping bass from next door shattered my concentration. It was as if the walls were vibrating with the cacophony of laughter, shouting, and the relentless beat of dance music. I glanced up at Mark, my husband, who was leaning back in his chair, his brow furrowed in irritation. I could see the irritation in his eyes mirroring my own, yet he opted for silence, a tactic he often employed to maintain peace. I tried to refocus, to drown out the party that had become an unwelcome soundtrack to my life, but each beat seemed to echo my frustration. Theo, our neighbor, had taken it upon himself to throw extravagant parties every weekend, and I was at my wit's end. The sheer volume of it all felt like a personal affront, a constant reminder that my tranquility was being trampled by his careless revelry. I could feel the tension building in my chest, a simmering anger that begged for release. It wasn't just the noise, it was the complete disregard he exhibited for those of us living nearby. My eyes flickered back to Mark, who had finally shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a silent acknowledgement of my plight. I wanted to scream, to tell him just how fed up I was, but I held my tongue. Instead, I took a deep breath and returned to my work, though the words on the page were nothing more than a blur. Each thud of bass reverberated through my body, igniting a fire deep within me that I couldn't ignore. It was more than just the music, it was the principle of it all. How could one person be so oblivious to the discomfort of others? As the night wore on, the party continued unabated. My frustration had morphed into a pervasive fatigue, a sense of helplessness that clung to me like a shadow. Finally, unable to contain my emotions any longer, I confronted Mark, my voice low but laced with tension. I poured out my feelings, revealing the deep-seated anger I had bottled up for far too long. I spoke of the sleepless nights, the endless interruptions, and the growing resentment that threatened to consume me. Mark listened, offering his usual suggestion to take a diplomatic approach, to talk to Theo like reasonable adults. But I was past that point. My patience was wearing thin, and the thought of approaching Theo felt futile. He was too self-absorbed to care. I leaned back against the couch, my heart racing as I contemplated my next move. A confrontation loomed on the horizon, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. It was a dangerous mix of anger and determination, an intoxicating cocktail that clouded my judgment. I envisioned myself storming into that party, demanding Theo acknowledge the havoc he wreaked on my life, on all our lives. The thought of facing him sent a thrill of fear and excitement through me. I was ready to reclaim my peace, even if it meant stepping into the lion's den. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The music faded into a distant hum, replaced by my racing heart and the vivid images of the confrontation I had planned. I envisioned myself standing before him, my words sharp and precise, cutting through the noise of his arrogance. I was prepared to unleash the torrent of my emotions, to bring him down a notch and make him understand the impact of his thoughtlessness. The darkness of the room enveloped me, but it could not shield the storm brewing within. I was on the cusp of something monumental, a decision that would alter the course of my life. I felt a fierce resolve settle in my bones. I would confront Theo during his next party. No more silence, no more passive acceptance of the chaos he had unleashed upon us. I would stand up for myself, for the peace I deserved, and bring to light the consequences of his reckless behavior. Little did I know, however, that the path I was choosing would lead me to unexpected revelations, challenging my desires for revenge in ways I could never have imagined. As I stood before the entrance of Theo's house, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and dread. I adjusted the hem of my shirt, reminding myself that I was no longer Daphne, the exhausted neighbor burdened by sleepless nights. Tonight, I was Dani, a stranger blending into the vibrant chaos of his party. The bass thumped through the walls, a relentless rhythm that seemed to pulse with the energy of the crowd inside. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door, stepping into a world drenched in laughter and colored by the flickering glow of party lights. The atmosphere enveloped me like a warm blanket, laughter bounced off the walls, and the scent of cocktails mingled with the sweet aroma of snacks. I forced myself to smile, to nod at the strangers who brushed past me, all while my mind raced with thoughts of my true purpose. Each face I passed was a reminder of the chaotic nights I endured, the sleep lost to the relentless parties that echoed through my walls. Yet, as I stepped deeper into the thrumming heart of the gathering, I felt an unexpected thrill. The energy was intoxicating, and for a moment I allowed myself to forget my anger. I made my way to the kitchen, where a group was engaged in animated conversation. I could see Theo at the center of it all, laughter rolling off his lips as he recounted a story that had everyone in stitches. My stomach twisted at the sight of him. He appeared so carefree, so alive, completely unaware of the havoc he wreaked in my life. But as I watched him, I couldn't ignore the pang of confusion that settled in my chest. Was this the man I hated? The one responsible for my sleepless nights? As the hours slipped by, I found myself engaging in casual conversations, sipping drinks that dulled my senses. I laughed at jokes that I didn't find particularly funny, but I played the part of the carefree partygoer well. The laughter and music washed over me, drowning out the initial bitterness I felt towards Theo. I observed him as he moved through the crowd, effortlessly charming those around him. This was not the monster I had conjured in my mind. He was a man seeking connection, surrounded by friends, unaware of the storm brewing in my heart. With each passing moment, I felt my resolve weaken. The anger that had fueled my desire for revenge began to dissolve in the light of his laughter. I was supposed to be gathering intelligence, plotting my next move, yet I found myself drawn to him, captivated by the glimmers of happiness on his face. I could see why people were drawn to him. He exuded a magnetic energy that filled the room. It was disarming and confusing, dulling the edge of my fury. Then, as the night deepened and the drinks flowed more freely, I found myself standing beside him at the bar, our eyes meeting in a fleeting moment of connection. The noise around us faded, and for a heartbeat, I glimpsed something deeper in his gaze, a flicker of vulnerability that belied his jovial exterior. It stirred something within me, a seed of empathy that I had not anticipated. Did he carry burdens I was unaware of? Was there more to Theo than the obnoxious neighbor who threw wild parties? As I sipped my drink, the warmth spreading through my body encouraged me to share a little of myself. I talked about my work, the pressures that came with it, and how I sometimes felt overwhelmed by life's demands. To my surprise, Theo listened intently, nodding as if he understood. His smile faded slightly, and I registered the shift in his demeanor. He wasn't just a party host. He was a man looking for solace in the chaos, perhaps as lost as I was in my own struggle. By the time I left the party, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The vengeance I had nurtured for so long was slipping through my fingers like sand. I had entered Theo's world with the intent to confront him, to expose the chaos he brought into my life, but instead, I had caught glimpses of his humanity. I stood outside his house, the laughter and music fading behind me, feeling the weight of my thoughts pressing down. The line between enemy and ally had blurred, and I was left grappling with a truth I hadn't expected. Perhaps revenge was not the answer, and understanding might be the key to resolving the turmoil that had consumed me for so long. As I continued to attend Theo's parties under the guise of Dani, I felt the lines between my initial intentions and the bond one was forming with him begin to blur. I would arrive with a mix of trepidation and curiosity, stepping into a world of laughter and loud music that once filled me with irritation. Each time, I watched Theo interact with his guests, his laughter infectious, his charisma undeniable. I learned to navigate the complexities of socializing in this transformed environment, where I was no longer just the aggrieved neighbor, but a part of something I had never expected to embrace. With each party, I became more aware of Theo's past. He would occasionally slip into moments of vulnerability, sharing snippets of his life during our conversations. I learned about his failed marriage, the heartache that lingered, and how losing his job had left him adrift. The more I listened, the more I understood that these extravagant gatherings were not just a means of escape for him, they were a desperate attempt to reclaim a sense of belonging and joy that had been stripped away. I began to view him not merely as the noisy neighbor, but as a man wrestling with his demons, desperately trying to fill an emotional void with fleeting moments of laughter and camaraderie. One night, after a particularly wild party, I witnessed a moment that would forever change my perception of him. The guests had thinned out, laughter faded into the night, and the atmosphere shifted. I found myself in the kitchen, half-heartedly cleaning up, when I heard muffled sounds coming from the living room. I hesitated before stepping out, my heart racing as I found Theo slumped on the floor, his face buried in his hands. The facade of the jovial host crumbled before my eyes, replaced by raw emotion. I stood frozen for a moment, grappling with the urge to comfort him and the remnants of my resentment. In that instant, my heart surged with compassion, a feeling that seemed foreign given the animosity I had harbored. I felt the weight of my own sleepless nights and frustrations, all the moments I had cursed him for his thoughtlessness. Yet, seeing him like this, so broken and vulnerable, ignited a conflict within me. How could I reconcile my own suffering with the empathy blossoming in my chest? It was a turning point, a moment where the potential for revenge felt hollow compared to the deeper understanding of human pain. Torn between my desire for vengeance and this newfound empathy, I confided in my closest friend, Sarah. I sought her counsel, hoping to untangle the web of emotions that clouded my judgment. Sitting in my living room, I confessed how my feelings for Theo had shifted from anger to a complex mixture of sympathy and confusion. I described the emotional breakdown I had witnessed and the tenderness that had sprung from it, even as I continued to feel the sting of my own sleepless nights. Sarah listened intently, her expression serious. She reminded me that emotions could easily cloud one's judgment, particularly in a situation as charged as this. Her words echoed in my mind, prompting me to reflect on the fine line I was walking. It was no longer about Theo being the antagonist in my story. The narrative was evolving, and I found myself grappling with the potential consequences of my actions. If I chose to act on my initial urge for revenge, I risked shattering not just his world, but also the fragile connection we had begun to forge. As I processed my emotions, I realized that my journey had taken an unexpected turn. The desire for revenge, once so consuming, began to feel like a relic of a past self. I felt a profound urge to help Theo instead, to guide him toward healing rather than push him further into despair. It was an uncomfortable realization, one that forced me to confront my own motivations and the true nature of my feelings. The transformation within me was palpable, and I knew I stood at a crossroads that would define not just my relationship with Theo, but also my understanding of compassion and forgiveness. The chaos of the party reached a fever pitch, the music thrumming in my chest as laughter and shouting spilled over into the night. I had come to learn that these parties were Theo's escape, a way to drown out the noise of his past. But tonight was different. The atmosphere felt electric, charged with a tension that rippled through the crowd. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I found myself at the epicenter of a scuffle, bodies colliding around me as I struggled to maintain my footing. In the midst of the chaos, a glimpse of Theo caught my eye. He stood by the bar, his playful demeanor stripped away, replaced by an expression of sheer distress. I watched as his mask slipped, revealing a man burdened by unseen weights. It struck me, this was not just a man who threw parties to forget. This was a man in pain, desperately trying to fill a void within himself. My heart raced as I wavered between my initial desire for revenge and this newfound understanding. As the ruckus settled, I approached him. My heart pounded in my ears, the anger I had once felt beginning to dissipate like the smoke from the extinguished candles around the room. Theo's eyes were wide, dulled by the effects of alcohol, but still retaining a glimmer of vulnerability that tugged at my conscience. I had prepared myself to unleash a torrent of resentment, to finally voice the frustrations that had brewed within me, but the sight of him, broken and raw, caught me off guard. The words I had rehearsed faltered on my tongue. Instead of accusations, I found myself wanting to reach out, to ease the burden I now understood he carried. I could feel the fissures in my resolve widen, my previous intentions blurring into a complex landscape of empathy and confusion. As he spoke, his voice hoarse and shaking, I learned of his loneliness, a feeling I had long associated with my own sleepless nights. In that moment, the lines between right and wrong began to dissolve. I was at a crossroads, the weight of my emotions pressing down on me as I realized that my desire for revenge was not just about the noise he made, the sleep he stole from me, but about the deeper implications of his behavior. Theo's pain mirrored my own, and I could not help but feel a surge of compassion. After our confrontation, I slipped away from the party, the loud music fading into a backdrop of my racing thoughts. I returned home with the night air cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the heated emotions swirling within me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the moments of the evening. The chaos of the party had mirrored the chaos of my heart, both desperate for a resolution, yet uncertain of what that resolution might entail. The realization washed over me like a wave. My desire for vengeance had morphed into something I had not anticipated. I wanted to help him, to guide him toward a path of healing rather than destruction. But how could I do that without losing sight of my own needs? My frustration remained, the sleepless nights still echoing in the recesses of my mind, but I could no longer deny the humanity I had seen in him. As I wrestled with these thoughts, I understood that I was at a turning point. My quest for revenge had led me to a deeper understanding of the complexities of human emotion. Theo was not just a nuisance, he was a man grappling with his demons, and perhaps in helping him confront those demons, I could find a way to reclaim my own peace. I lay there, the weight of the night settling around me, knowing that I was on the brink of a decision that would alter the course of our lives. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with the potential for both healing and heartache. Yet, I could not shake the sense of purpose that began to settle within me. I realized that perhaps the greatest revenge was not in causing him pain, but in helping him find solace. The thought stirred something within me, igniting a flicker of hope amidst the turmoil. As I sat on the worn-out couch in my living room, the weight of my decision pressed heavily on my chest. The plan I had devised to address Theo's disruptive behavior felt both liberating and terrifying. I stared at the blank wall, envisioning the faces of my neighbors, discontent, frustrated, and longing for peace, just like me. I couldn't drown in my own anger anymore. It was time to rally the community and confront the chaos that had become a fixture in our lives. The day of the community meeting dawned, and I felt a mix of anxiety and determination coursing through me. I meticulously prepared my notes, rehearsing the points I wanted to convey. It was essential to approach this delicately. I needed to strike a balance between holding Theo accountable for his actions and shining a light on the struggles that had driven him to seek solace in reckless parties. I hoped that with a little empathy, perhaps we could all find a way to coexist. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting time, I arrived at the neighborhood community center, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and I could see familiar faces flickering with anticipation and irritation. My heart raced as I took a seat, scanning the crowd for any sign of Theo. Would he show? Would he listen? The tension was palpable as more neighbors filtered in, each one carrying the weight of their own grievances. When the meeting commenced, I felt the atmosphere shift dramatically. Anger bubbled beneath the surface as residents began to voice their frustrations. I listened intently, feeling the collective annoyance that had simmered for so long. Names like loud music, disturbance at all hours, and disrespect echoed in the room, each word piercing through the tension like a knife. It was overwhelming. Yet, as the complaints mounted, I felt a surge of responsibility to steer the conversation toward a more constructive path. Finally, it was my turn to speak. With a deep breath, I stood and faced the crowd. My voice wavered slightly, but I pressed on. I spoke candidly about my own experiences living next to Theo, sharing my sleepless nights and the frustration that had once consumed me. But then I pivoted. I shared what I had learned about Theo's struggles, his failed marriage and job loss, the pain that lurked behind the facade of his parties. I could feel the room's energy shift as I recounted how we often fail to see the people behind their actions, the reasons driving them to seek escape. As I continued, I noticed the expressions on my neighbors' faces transform from outright anger to contemplation. It was unsettling yet hopeful. Their eyes softened as they began to see Theo not just as a nuisance, but as a human being grappling with his demons. I was surprised by the turns our conversation was taking. The empathy I had hoped to evoke seemed to be taking root. Just then, the door creaked open, and there he was, Theo. His presence sent a ripple of tension through the room, and I could see the vulnerability etched on his face. He looked visibly shaken, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on me. I felt a mix of dread and sympathy as I met his gaze. This was the moment I had envisioned, but the reality felt much heavier. As the discussion continued, some neighbors expressed their support for Theo, advocating for understanding rather than condemnation. I watched as he absorbed their words, the walls he had built around himself beginning to falter. But the emotional confrontation I had anticipated was yet to come. It loomed just beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. Finally, the moment arrived. I could feel the collective breath of the room as Theo stood to speak. His voice trembled as he began to share his side of the story, his struggles spilling out like an open wound. It was raw, unfiltered, and achingly honest. I felt a rush of compassion, mingled with the remnants of my own anger. How could I reconcile the two? How could I help him while still addressing the pain he had caused? As he spoke, I saw the shift in the room, neighbors leaning in, their expressions evolving from judgment to understanding. The emotional weight of the moment enveloped us all, creating a space where healing seemed possible. I realized that this meeting was no longer just about confronting Theo. It was about acknowledging our shared humanity, the pain we all carry beneath the surface. In that pivotal moment, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer after all. Perhaps this was an opportunity for all of us to grow, to learn from one another, and to foster a sense of community that had long been overshadowed by discord. As I looked at Theo, I understood that our paths had intertwined in ways I never could have anticipated, forging a connection that could lead us both toward redemption. As I stood in the middle of the community gathering, a palpable tension hung in the air. I had watched as Theo's face, once filled with hope, transformed into a mask of dread when the door swung open to reveal a familiar figure from his past. The moment was charged, the atmosphere thick with uncertainty. I could see the way Theo's shoulders slumped, the light in his eyes dimming as his former friend, Marcus, strolled into the room like a dark cloud rolling over a sunny day. The whispers and murmurs among the neighbors intensified, curiosity morphing into judgment as Marcus took center stage. His words were sharp and calculated, intended to slice through the fragile peace we had attempted to build. He spoke of a tragedy, one that had left scars not only on Theo's life, but also on the lives of others. As he recounted events that had transpired years ago, I felt a chill creep down my spine. It was as if Marcus had reached into the depths of Theo's past and pulled out the darkest threads of his history, weaving them into a narrative that threatened to unravel everything we had worked toward. The room was divided, some gasped in shock, while others recoiled in disgust. I could feel the weight of judgment shifting, the tide turning against Theo once more. But within that chaos, a fire ignited in me. I had come to understand Theo not just as the obnoxious neighbor who disrupted my life, but as a man grappling with his own demons. The anger I had initially felt was morphing into something else, a fierce protectiveness, a need to shield him from the very same community that now seemed poised to tear him apart. I could sense the smirks of those who had always wanted to see him fail, the vindictive delight in their eyes as they leaned in to hear more. I had to act. With a surge of determination, I stepped forward, my heart pounding. As I faced Marcus, I could see disdain etched on his face, but I held my ground. I wasn't just defending Theo, I was defending the fragile bonds we had begun to forge in our community. I challenged Marcus, questioning his motives for dredging up the past. Was it truly about helping the community, or was he merely reveling in the chaos of Theo's downfall? My voice was steady, but inside, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. The room fell silent, all eyes on the unfolding confrontation. I detailed the progress we had made, the connections we had formed, and how we had begun to see Theo as a flawed but redeemable person. I pointed out the hypocrisy of those who were eager to cast him out without considering the complexities of his situation. My words echoed in the stillness, and for a heartbeat, I believed I could sway the narrative back into our favor. As I spoke, I could see Theo behind Marcus, his expression a mixture of gratitude and despair. I felt a rush of empathy for him, A man who had so desperately sought respite from his pain through those raucous parties, only to have them turned against him in a moment of vulnerability. My heart ached for the weight he carried, the loneliness that accompanied his failed marriage, the loss of his job, and the relentless pressure to drown out the silence of his own thoughts. In that moment, it became clear to me that we were at a crossroads. A single choice could lead us down two very different paths, one of destruction and division, and the other toward healing and understanding. I urged the community to reconsider their stance. Instead of casting Theo into the shadows, we should be offering him a lifeline. My words seemed to resonate, igniting a flicker of compassion among some of the neighbors, who began to murmur in agreement. As the tension in the room began to shift, I turned back to Theo, who was now staring at me with a mixture of awe and relief. The walls he had built around himself were beginning to crack. The truth was finally out in the open, but it didn't have to destroy him. I could see the gears turning in his mind as he processed my plea. With the truth laid bare, it was Theo's turn to confront his demons. He stood, visibly shaken, but I could see the resolve forming in his expression. The redemption I had hoped for was within reach, but it was up to him to take that step. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew that together, we could transform this moment into something meaningful for both of us and for the community that surrounded us. As I looked around the room, I felt a sense of camaraderie blossom amidst the tension, an understanding that we were all flawed, all struggling in our own ways. In that moment, I realized that my desire for revenge had morphed into a quest for healing, not just for Theo, but for myself and for all of us. The journey ahead would not be easy, but as I took a deep breath, I felt a profound sense of peace. Together, we could rise from the ashes of our past, united in our imperfections and our shared humanity.